Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bert Glass, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Director for Boston University's College of Communication. Today, we are here to discuss the many facets of the field, nonprofit communications. We will also touch on exploring evolving social awareness, misconceptions of the field, and best practices for moving your organization, mission, and primary audience forward. I'm excited to introduce our panelists. First is Justin Abraham. Justin joined the Lovett School in Atlanta in October 2021 with nearly 15 years of experience in independent schools and television news. As Director of Communications, he leads a team responsible for developing communication strategies that help advance the school's admissions, fundraising, and awareness efforts. These strategies include publications, digital marketing, social media, videos, and media outreach. Prior to joining Lovett, he served as the Director of Digital Communications for the Westminster School in Atlanta. Previously, he was a content producer and social meteorologist for the Weather Channel and digital content director and meteorologist for KMIZ-TV in Missouri. Justin is a graduate of Boston University's College of Communication, yay, where he completed a degree in journalism before receiving a master's degree in atmospheric science from the University of Missouri in Columbia. He has been named a stellar speaker by CASE, the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, and was honored with the Circle of Excellence Award for his work in nonprofit fundraising. Justin, thanks for joining us. I'm also excited to welcome Rachelle Sanders, recognized leader in global philanthropy with over 25 years of experience in sectors spanning healthcare, education, science, and strategic communication. She was recently appointed Chief Development Officer of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, the world's largest private funder of breast cancer research. Ms. Sanders served for 10 years as Vice President and Chief Development Officer for Montefiore Health System and the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, a nationally recognized academic medical center. She was previously the Executive Director of Development for the Winthrop P. Rockefeller Cancer Institute. In addition to working with large, mission-driven organizations, Ms. Sanders is an executive coach and founder of Personal Best Executive Coaching. Working with clients from across the United States to around the world, she has developed a successful business model to help advance their careers and improve fulfillment overall. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Communications from Boston University and a Master of Arts in Public Policy from Trinity College, Hartford. She was a board member of the Alliance Française of Westchester and an active volunteer for Westchester Reformed Temple, Dorrit, New York, Boston University, and Brandeis University. She resides in Westchester, New York. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Our third panelist is Chip Weiskotten, the Director of Strategic Communications at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, where he oversees all facets of the foundation's messaging and outreach operations. He develops and implements communication strategies to promote and support the foundation's ocean and Great Lakes conservation work in traditional and digital media. This includes social media, public relations, promotions, marketing, corporate partnership communications, brand management, internal communications, and whatever mini crisis pops up that day. That sounds very familiar. Previously, Chip worked in communications at the Wildlife Conservation Society, where he advocated for a range of wildlife conservation issues as they intersect with U.S. government funding and policy interests. Working closely with field scientists, policymakers, and journalists, Chip led campaigns to conserve elephants and other frequently trafficked wildlife, as well as efforts to restore bison to the American plains. Before that, he handled communications for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and worked as a field organizer on a congressional campaign. He earned a bachelor's degree in environmental analysis and policy and a master's degree in energy and environmental analysis from Boston University. Chip lives in Washington, D.C. and enjoys photography, hiking, maps, and spending time with his 3 kids. So he's also busy. Thank you. Thanks, Chip. So serving as moderator for our panel today is Edward Downs, Associate Professor of Public Relations here at Boston University's College of Communication. Before his arrival here, he held such positions as Public Relations Director and Marketing Representative for a variety of employers in Washington, D.C., including the U.S. Congress and National Trade Associations. He has presented more than 25 peer-reviewed papers and has contributed chapters for the books Government Public Relations, A Reader, and Corporate Communication, A Cross-Cultural Approach. Look for his forthcoming and first book, Press Secretary, The Story of Capitol Hill's Image, later this year or early next. Before I turn it over to Ed, a few housekeeping notes. Just a reminder that today's discussion will be recorded. Also, our speakers are very eager to answer your questions after the roundtable, and you are welcome to submit them through the presentation using the Q&A box. You can find this box by hovering over your screen on your computer, locating the Zoom toolbar, and selecting Q&A. We would like you to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we'll collect them, and Ed will present them to the panel. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Ed. All yours, Ed. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bert. I want to share with y'all that Bert is a brilliant addition to the College of Communication and does a wonderful job managing all of our communications. We're so lucky to have him. He's also got a background in nonprofit PR, which is interesting. And like Rachelle, he has served as a guest speaker in my nonprofit course. And like you, Rachelle, he was brilliant. So I'm so glad you're here. But there's more important things to talk about. Number one is, before we get started, I want to just mention, Chip, how are you doing? How was the last 24, 48 hours been for you?
Well, I'm a little sleep deprived. We welcomed a new baby on Thursday, St. Patrick's Day. So little Isla is just under 4 days old, and I'm fueled with a lot of coffee. Grandparents are on diaper duty, and so happy to spend some time here with you guys.
Well, we just want to give Isla a hand. Nicely done. Nicely done. We've got another piece of news. I'm wondering, we've got Rachelle coming from Australia, for goodness sake. Thank you for getting up at 3 in the morning to be with us and educate us. What the heck are you, and we know this is a leading question, but what the heck are you doing in Australia, for goodness sake?
It's a total terrier pride here. Well, my fiance lives in Sydney. It's been over 2 years with the COVID lockdown, so they finally opened the country on February 21st. And it is 3:07 a.m. here in the northern beaches of Sydney, and we're getting married later today. So go Terriers.
And Justin, you just have such an impressive career. We don't even have to bother, digging further. You're just great. Thank you all for coming. This is really, really excellent. I'm going to be quiet in just a minute. I want to welcome a number of my former students who contacted me, and thank you all for coming on. We've got almost 100 people coming in today, which is really great. About 80% of whom are alumni, and I was thinking about all of the folks on the panel, to a large degree, have been educated, at least in part, at Boston University. And having taught the nonprofit course at the grad and undergrad level for about 25 years, it's been very interesting because those folks are unique folks who come in to study this part of our communication management systems. They're unique folks, they're admirable folks. And I'll share with you, it's one of my favorite groups with whom to work. I think one thing that they're looking for is passion and meaning in their work. They want passion, they want meaning in their work. And I think when I heard the bios of all our colleagues today, I found that. Just a quick anecdote, and then we're going to get started. The anecdote is this. For a number of years, I lived at Kenmore Square, which you all know is just a 3-minute walk or so from College of Communication. And over the years, I probably had, I'm going to guess, several hundred, maybe 200 conversations with the homeless folks who tend to gather in front of the 7-Eleven there. And in the last 10 years, 5 of these folks have died. And that reminds me of the important work that we do in the nonprofit arena of service to others, finding purpose in our own life, and doing what we do. So with that memory in mind and a dedication to the good folks with whom I formed relationships over many years, I welcome the panel, and I thank you very much for your work. So again, very much, thank you for being here. I'd like to ask a question to the panel, if I may. It's kind of a general question. If you all are okay with this, maybe we can just go right down the line and you can think about it for a second and then answer the question. How's that sound? Good enough? Okay. The question is, it's kind of a 2-part question. The first part of the question is this: what drew you to nonprofit communication management? What drew you to this venue? The second part of the question is there anything unique about what you do as a nonprofit professional that might stand out, something unique about your own work as a nonprofit professional that might make you unique? So part 1 is what drew you to the nonprofit, and number 2 is there anything in your own work or your experience that makes you unique in that sector? it really doesn't matter. I'm just thinking, Rachelle, you got up at like 2:30. So if you're good enough to go first, we'll have you go first. And then we can go to Chip because he's probably
Sounds
not
great.
stopping than Justin. How's that sound?
Great.
Good, thank you. Yes, and I can't have my coffee, so I'm just staring wantingly at Eddie's big mug there, but it's all good. So what drew me to nonprofit was actually, for me, it was accidental. And I had been working in PR and agencies and really unfulfilled. I'd had a series of not so nice clients, not so honest. I had to represent a company, an au pair organization where, a baby died and they hadn't done their due diligence. And, there was just a series of those things. And when I had moved to Hartford with my husband back in the early 90s, I was interviewing at agencies and I was going to cry. I kept thinking actually about Kenmore Square. I was like, I could just go back to Uno's and, serve pizzas because that would be better. And I found a tiny little ad for Trinity College. And when I was interviewing, she said, well, we're a nonprofit. And I was thinking, what is that? I genuinely didn't know about the nonprofit sector. It wasn't something that was taught when I went to BU. It wasn't so common for people to really be aiming for careers in that field. And they were very interested in my communication skills. So what drew me was, in sitting there, I was thinking, I get to promote education. This place is great, and I met with these wonderful professors and they did great work in the community in Hartford. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. And sure enough, that was the answer. That was the beginning of my career in nonprofit work. So I was very excited. And in terms of what's unique, I was sharing this with you earlier, unique is a funny word to me. I'm not so sure that, I can't claim to be unique in any way, although maybe today, but in general, not so much. And, but what I think about is I'm very optimistic. As you can tell from my personality, I'm also very exuberant. When I go in, I'm all in. And so I think what I bring to it is wherever I am, it's that passion, that optimism. If it's a bad day, tomorrow's going to be a better day, and really believing in the work that we're doing. Sometimes it's a heavy burden, like you talked about, that the issues in the nonprofit world are very severe. Working in the Bronx when I was at Montefiore, it's the poorest congressional district in the country. So the programs that we were providing were actually so important that I remember my boss at that point said, healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. We don't turn anyone away. And I said, okay, you've got me. Like, you've totally got me. So I think that's what I bring to the work.
Rachelle, thanks so much. We can go to Chip next, if I may. And a quick thought for you, Rachelle. Thank you for sharing that. Your career is amazing, and that you got started in that venue and built on that is just admirable. I'm really glad to know you. Thank you for sharing
Thank you,
that.
Eddie.
Sure,
Thanks.
Chip.
Sure, and thanks for the question. I think that, so. Maybe in a little bit different from the other panelists or other people's career paths, I was in the nonprofit stuff before I was into communications. So I knew for a long time that I wanted to work in the environment or the environmental field and advocacy. Just grew up appreciating nature, being close to nature. And as I, kind of progressed in my education, learned more about the issues that are affecting the world around us, climate change, that is just affecting every part of our life. So when I went to school, at BU, I knew I wanted to focus on something that would help change the world, the physical world. So that's why I majored in environmental policy, and I came into communications kind of by chance a little later. So for me, it's more about being able to make an impact where I want to make an impact. And communications happens to be the place where I can put my skills to work and make that happen. This is an industry where it really helps to believe in what you're doing. You're going to make sacrifices in other ways, but it pays off in the big ways, and that's right here and in here. You can't buy a house with heart, but you can feel better when you go to bed at night. So that's what drew me to this position. And like Rachelle, I don't think I'm particularly unique. I think for my position, I have a really good background for getting my job done. I come from a background of policy, from nonprofit expertise and then communications. And in what I do, I'm talking to policymakers, I'm talking to journalists, I'm talking to scientists, and I can do any of those things at any one day, and kind of know what they're talking about, and they know what I'm talking about. So I think that helps me in what I do.
Chip, thanks so much. It was interesting when you talked about the passion and the meaning in your work that the rest of the panelists readily shook their head in agreement with you. So thank you so much. And thank you for your work very much. I admire you as well. Hi, Justin.
Hello.
I had no kids and didn't get married today. So you and I are in the same boat. So
Perfect. We had plenty of sleep. We're good to go. I would say my journey is sort of like Rachelle's, is that, from my bio, I obviously went through the journalism track to BU. I went to grad school for meteorology. I was, prepared to be an on-air meteorologist, and I did that for a few years. But I think anybody in the news industry will tell you that after a while, the news and negativity sort of wears you down after a while. It really gets to you. And so I was burnt out a little bit after about 6 years of being in the TV industry, both in local and at the national network level. And I was looking for a way to sort of use those communication skills in a different mindset, in a different way. And so I just happened to have a friend who was working at a school in Atlanta who came across a job posting for a position that was about websites, social media, press relations, crisis communications. And I thought, well, I have some of those skills by being a communicator on air. And so I just went that route. I was able to get that position and sort of grow from there. But being able to work in a school where you're able to tell positive stories, they are good stories of what these amazing things that our students are doing, what our alumni and faculty are doing. It's definitely more rewarding than sort of the negative news and the crime that you report on being in the news industry. So I would say that's how I sort of got to a nonprofit. Like Rachelle, I had no clue that, independent schools and schools in general are usually nonprofits. And so that was sort of a new industry and new way for me to think. So that was definitely an interesting task. And like the other two, I don't consider what I do unique. What I would say is that it's unique in the fact that being a school, we're not the nonprofit that you would think of. We're not a charity or foundation. We're not necessarily making a direct impact in the community as other organizations might, but we are sort of educating our students. We are preparing them to go out into the world and do those amazing things. We've had students create medical devices that diagnose different medical conditions. We've had an alum who goes on to be an astronaut. So it's sort of setting up our students in order to go out and do those bigger and better things.
Justin, thanks so much. I'm reminded of a conversation with a business professor who did nonprofit work. And I said, why do you do what you do? I mean, you can make a lot of money going out and being an MBA from a top program. And he said, well, when I look at my life, and you reminded me of this, Justin, when I look at my life, I realize I didn't sell 10,000 automobiles or 100,000 cans of tomato soup, but it made a difference in the thousands of lives. And that as I reflect on your conversation, Justin, thank you for your work and for building the lives and the foundation for so many people. Just great. I want to move on to a question about tips that you may have for success in the nonprofit. But before I ask about tips, is there anything else that you all want to share based on what anyone else has said? Are we doing okay? Good? Okay. Let me ask you this. About 80% of the folks listening are alumni. There'll be some students and stuff. And you all have had brilliant careers, just admirable careers and meaningful careers and successful careers. Can I ask you to give me 1 or 2 or 3 tips that you might share with the folks listening about how to be successful in the nonprofit environment? So it's a different question from how to be successful coming out of a communication background or learning about communications or doing communications, but what are some tips about being successful in the nonprofit arena? Would you all be comfortable sharing? Anybody can go who'd like to.
I'll jump in with one. And this does relate to communications, but a lot of times in nonprofits, you're a little limited by resources. A lot of them are run on shoestring budgets, and you wear a lot of hats. Not a lot of money flowing through a lot of times. So you have to learn how to focus on the things that really matter. I run a department that is focused on the whole organization. So there's a lot of competing needs. And so you have to kind of keep in mind your ultimate objectives. And that depends on what your organization does. And I'll use my last job as an example. There were three things that I had to focus on making sure happened. We need to focus on raising funds, driving attendance at the Bronx Zoo, which is what the wildlife conservation does. So Rachelle's probably been there. And then moving policy. So if someone asked me to do something for communications for the organization that didn't raise funds, drive attendance, and move policy, if it didn't make an impact on any of those things, I have to put it to the side. You have to learn how to kind of conserve your resources, learn how to say no, and direct your attention where it can make the most impact.
Thanks so much. Great. Thank you.
I would say sort of building off of that, really, when you start working for a nonprofit, knowing the mission and having clear messaging around that is important. Just within the school sort of environment, there's at least 20, 25 independent schools that families can choose from just within the city of Atlanta. And so having your mission clearly defined about what you're doing, what your purpose is, and sort of being able to give that elevator pitch to a family about what sets you apart from every other school in this city, and sort of every other nonprofit, really helps down the road when it comes to either the admission process for fundraising, when you're talking to donors, really understanding what their support is going toward and why it's different from every other school in the city, and just really having the messaging defined and clear. We did a sort of an audit of our communications at the school 6 months ago, found out we had 6 different definitions of our mission, which was clearly not great. The athletics team was saying one thing, admissions was saying another, and so that really confused the messaging about who we are. And so we boiled that down to one clearly defined mission that we are all saying now. And so we're all on the same page of pushing forward who we are and what we are doing and why you should be a part of this organization.
Great, thank you.
Justin, I wanted to say I've been there with the competing missions from different parts of the organization. It is the bane of my existence.
It's a mess.
Excellent. Well, all right, I'm going to tag on to those thoughts twofold. One is sort of when you're in it, right? So what you might not recognize is nonprofit landscape is really competitive, right? When I worked in medical, academic medicine, in New York City, we're a dime a dozen. And by the way, our patients were grateful but had no money, right? How do you compete for the fundraising dollars, right? And, breast cancer research I'm doing now. I mean, if you Google it, yes, BCRF is the number one rated, but there are a lot of organizations that do what we do or claim to do what we do. So part of understanding your audience, really understanding who is coming to you or supporting you. I can't stress that enough, because that is going to make the difference in all of your communications and in all of your efforts. So that's a part of it. On the more personal side, and when you're thinking about your career, I have a favorite quote that I saved on my phone here to share with you. I love Edward Gorey. That's like a little twisted, darker side of me, but he said some great things. And I posted this on my LinkedIn. And he said, be open to everything. Never close your mind, because you never know where your next idea may come from. And in my career, Eddie, you kind of alluded to this. I've kind of had this very interesting, I didn't stay in a lane. I didn't just say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. When someone came to me and said, hey, there's a boarding school in Massachusetts looking for someone with communication skills, I'm thinking, I've never even been to a boarding school, right? I'm a public school kid. So, but yeah, I'll go check it out. Like, hey, you want to move to Sweden? Okay, maybe I'll move to Sweden. So just think about it. Don't necessarily close yourself off, because some of the best experiences, even the recruiter who got me to the Bronx, it was one of the best experiences. And when she first said, I'm like, nah, I'm not going. And then I said, no, Rachelle, you should go, you should visit. So I would just encourage you to try to be open in your thinking.
Boy, this is good. Thank you so much. If I may have a follow-up question for you. By the way, just a reminder that the panelists, as we mentioned, are eager to answer any questions. Shoot them if you have them. We'll be glad to do that. I was thinking about your work, and to some degree, you all are now at a management level. I mean, you're thinking about strategy, and you're thinking about budgets, and you're thinking about sort of these non-physical things that still are important to make the organization run. What's going on outside? How do I manage people? What's our long-term goal? Could you talk a little bit about the difference between doing direct service to someone feeding the homeless, versus being a manager who doesn't do direct service, but whose work indirectly serves? Do you know what I mean? The distinction there. Could you share a little bit about the distinction between being a tactician, writing things and writing copy and writing speeches and designing websites, versus being a manager where you have a more of a strategic or a large scale vision? I asked this question in my own life. That was the transition that I had. And I'm just curious if you all, is that a clear enough question? Are you okay with that? Let's go with that.
I'll say, not to answer for Justin, but if he is helping train the astronaut and doesn't get to go into space and make these discoveries, that's a bit of a bummer. But I feel the same thing in my job. I would love to be out there on the water conserving, disentangling whales, for example. We find people who do that. And it is hard when you're not seeing it day to day to keep that focus. So it's all about creating these objectives and keeping touch with the people on the ground who are doing the stuff that you're making possible. Serving any reminder that you can get that you are an integral part of that great work that is actually happening. It's difficult to do.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. I would say also, going back to this whole idea of nonprofit or not for profit, nothing happens without the funds, right? That's it. None of this great, exciting, amazing work happens without the fundraising. And so what your messaging, your management, all of those pieces essentially are critical to make it happen. So I always think of that book, what got you here won't get you there. And the things that you might have done hands-on when you were earlier in your career, as you rise in your career, you're more, like you said, Eddie, management, but you also get to impact people's careers. And that has been very rewarding for me. So not just the actual mission and the work that the organization does, but I look at the people who've worked for me and I see them on LinkedIn, and this one's running a cancer center out in San Diego. And I'm like, yes, they're doing well. And so you're also having an impact on others' careers, which has been very fulfilling as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
what a great angle. I hadn't thought about that. Please, I'm sorry, Justin. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was gonna say, as much as I would love to be sort of on the front lines and doing that work, the people who may be doing that work may not know how to get the exposure of those amazing things that they are doing. And so that's where we step in and are able to tell those stories to mass audiences, whether through the website, a magazine or a print piece of some sort. But also, as Rachelle alluded to, that fundraising piece. One thing I didn't realize when it comes to schools is there's a tuition gap between the amount of money that someone pays for tuition and the actual cost of educating a student. And so we come in to be able to fundraise, to bring in the donors to close that gap and allow a student to have the education, to have the experiences where they're able to then go on and do those incredible, feats and all that amazing work out there on the front lines.
This is great. There's a question that came in. I'm going to share it with you. So I'll share the question, and then I want to make sure before we move on to some questions, if there's anything on your mind that you want to share that has come up. Do you know what I mean? Something, we're good for time. So if something came up like, Eddie, I wish you had brought this up. I wish you'd said this. If there's something like that, we can do that. So here's the question that we're going to ask in a minute. The question is, how effectively do you use storytelling in your work? So there's the question. How effectively do you use storytelling? Is there anything to precede your answers to that question that you want to share with the group about what might be on your mind that's come up, or are you doing okay? Doing great. Well, it's interesting. I was reading I teach a course in public speaking, and the literature says the most powerful thing you can do is tell a story. It's not stats, it's not data, it's not testimonials, it's a story. And I'm so glad we did this, because as we were preparing for our presentations today, for your presentations today, we talked about anecdotes or stories. So let me ask this question again, and then we can go to the panel, please. The question again is, the question is, how do you effectively use storytelling in your work? How do you effectively use storytelling in your work?
I mean, I would say for me, it's almost every day that we're able to tell stories in different ways, whether it's through social media or through a longer form piece like a video or a magazine. We're constantly trying to sort of crawl for stories that are coming from our students and our faculty. Sometimes teachers will hear about something that a student is doing off campus that they've been able to do because of their education here. And so we're able to sort of bring them into the communications office and really dive into what are they doing? How did the school get them to be able to do that? Do they have any sort of support or mentors? And then also reaching out to our alumni and just seeing what they're doing on a daily basis. We've got alumni who are all over the world, either through businesses or doing also nonprofit work, and being able to tell their story of how they were able to do what they do because of the education they received, and sort of tying it back to what the school does, and then by doing that, sort of what donors can support. That's really sort of the end goal, is being able to bring in more donors to sort of fund all these efforts, whether it's on campus through different school experiences and trips, or if it's through alumni later on in life.
It's a fair assumption, maybe, Justin, to mention that Rachelle had mentioned that without the money, nothing happens, right? I mean, so yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Rachelle or Chip, what about storytelling? What comes to mind?
I would say, it's interesting having worked in medicine and science and not having medical background. I mean, I remember when I first got to the Rockefeller Cancer Institute in Little Rock, one of the doctors gave me this Cancer for Dummies book. I was laughing because it was on my nightstand, right? I mean, I had to really get myself up to speed on all the research. The stories actually connect to your audience, right? Because almost all of the people I'm trying to communicate with are lay people, right? They have some understanding of the work, but it's very complex. So that it's a connector. The stories are a connector. So I'll just give you a quick example. There was this one great doctor, Suzanne Klimberg. She was a breast cancer doctor, and she had come up with a way to cure or treat lymphedema, which is the swelling of the arm for patients. And she got the idea. Her kid was doing a science project, and it was one of those ant farm things, but they put ink in it, and the ink was traveling down into the sand. And she just thought, we put a dye in the lymph nodes, right? And so, and then it actually became a standard of care. But telling the story, right, and using the image that we all kind of recognize from our childhood of, sand and ink and water, and showing the inspiration, that really kind of brought it to light and made it exciting for people. So that a lot of times in my work, it's really trying to make that connection for people where they also feel like they really have an understanding, and inspiring ideas seem to connect.
Thank you so much. Wow. Good.
And the same goes for my work as well. We tell stories all the time, and it's all about making things personal. I work on the ocean, which, a lot of us love the ocean, but for a lot of people, they may never see the ocean, and they don't have any memories of it. So it's our job to tell these stories to make people connect, understand some really kind of technical and complicated issues, like climate change. If you can illuminate climate change in the story of one species that people can connect to or know about, one coral reef that's experiencing crazy decline because of 1 degree of warming in the ocean. Those are tangible examples that people can kind of put their finger on and say, this is something we need to all care about. This is a reason to care. This is a reason to give money, that kind of thing.
Good. Thanks so much. There's some really good questions that have come up. The first one I'd like to propose to you, a fair warning that it talks about a first audience. So pay attention to the first audience they're talking about here. What advice do you have when you write content to two audiences, donors, supporters, and the people you are supporting? I've noticed most nonprofits focus more on the first audience, donors, supporters, and their messaging to receipts can sound off-putting or corporate. What would your sense be to that question?
I would just say, I have always tried really hard, going back to, knowing your audience is also writing for your audience and really trying to personalize communications. So we segment. A lot of times, I've worked very hard to segment our messaging and for all of our different audiences. And it's a really good point, actually. It's a great question, because sometimes it's hard. And as Chip alluded to, a lot of times we're really lean. We're lean staffed. We're lean on every lean. And so you don't always have the luxury of, hiring a firm that's going to do all the different letters. So you have to just do your best to be cognizant of it, because sometimes I've noticed audiences. Once I did a test and I made $10 donations to a slew of healthcare organizations just to kind of see what the communications I got back. I was like a shopper, how often they communicated with me. And it was shocking. Some of the greatest organizations, really high level places had not such great communication. So it just takes a lot of effort to think about your targets.
I agree. It's hard to craft a message that can talk to everybody. That's why, we kind of specialize a little bit, but, something Justin said earlier was, when he was talking about the different mission statements for different parts of the organization, you have to go back to your basics. And then if you talk about kind of the organization's brand values, those should be universal. They shouldn't be brand values if you can't use those to talk to everybody. So keeping things to the basics and what the organization truly believes in shouldn't make, in some cases, shouldn't make a difference if you're talking to a high value donor or the community that you're servicing.
Great.
I would say in the same way, if you can segment the audiences as much as possible in those different cases, that would be great. Otherwise, just speaking to what your organization is doing for everybody, I think that helps, whether it's a stewardship piece, whether it's a donor solicitation piece. It still speaks to what your organization is doing, its values, its mission. It doesn't have to come off as corporate or, too professional. Everyone who is a part of it will be inspired and proud of what that organization is doing. So I'd rather, if you're not going to segment the piece, speak to everybody as much as and broadly as you can.
That's great. Thanks so much. The next question is really most appropriate for the panel, because you've got a breadth of experience, a breadth of things that you bring to the table, size of organizations, the type of volunteers, the type of donors, et cetera, and the missions. So let me share this question with you and ask I think this is a particularly interesting, the last question was excellent, and this is a particularly interesting question because it's so broad. Here it is. Would you distinguish between one more time. Would you distinguish between PR efforts and techniques for causes, lung cancer, as opposed to organizations with physical locations, schools, zoos? You can think about that for just a minute. I think that's from Phyllis Zagano, my old colleague here at Boston, and she's famous in her own right. So I don't know if that's you, Phyllis. I hope it is. And I hope you're well. And we had a good time 25 years ago on WBUR talking about how somebody becomes famous. So I miss you, Phyllis, if that's you. I bet you it is. How many Phyllis Zaganos are there anyway? So back to the question, though. The question is, then again, what would you come up with in terms of the inquiry or the answer to that question?
Actually, this is the first time in my career. So BCRF is, a conglomeration of outstanding scientists from around the world. We don't have a physical location other than an empty office on 44th Street right now. So it is a different message than, something that is physical, and that something is directly related to an area. So, and I'm thinking about you, Chip, like Justin, I'm thinking about your school, and Chip, I'm thinking about the ocean. Like, okay, that's different too. But, for us, it's really the outcomes of the research, and it goes back to the storytelling, right? The PR goes back to beating breast cancer. But we don't have shiny buildings to show. We don't have all of those pieces that we normally publicize. So this is the first time, and we are very strategic in our communications broadly for people who have been touched by breast cancer.
Go ahead, Justin.
I was saying this sort of goes back to the storytelling piece. With breast cancer, you're able to tell these stories of either research or personal stories. With the ocean, it's, whether it's different causes or different scientists. With schools, it's the people, it's the students, it's the faculty, alumni. So really speaking to those sort of the people and who have the stories to tell, that's sort of the PR piece. It definitely is different when it comes to, a cause versus, a school or some other sort of nonprofit. But if you're able to sort of get down to the basics of just being able to tell those stories of the people and research that you're doing, I think that is sort of a universal thing that we all deal with.
Mm-hmm. Good. Good.
And I have a sort of a unique perspective on this. Is my last organization, the Wildlife Conservation Society, runs the zoos in New York City, but I was in the Washington D.C. office working on policy, and so those two parts of the organization, really there was a push and pull at all times. Are we doing not enough to drive attendance? Are we not doing enough on these kind of broader issues? So from a technical perspective, it's there's a lot of differences in who you're going to target with your PR efforts. You might versus local media versus anywhere in the country to talk about some of these bigger issues. But we found kind of a middle ground where we would just try and infuse the messaging from each into both sides. If there's a story about a new tiger cub at the zoo that we want people to go see, you're also taking that opportunity to talk about our tiger conservation efforts in the wild. Why are tigers going extinct? Making sure that's all part of the same outreach. You're going to reach a different audience, but hopefully, check a few of those boxes for your different goals.
Thanks so much. There's two questions here. Maybe I think we can get to them. Really interesting. And I'm kind of touched by how important your work is, how meaningful, how beneficial, how purpose-filled. I just thank you again for your work. And I'll stop talking now. The next question, we've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but maybe a brief answer, if we could do a brief answer to this one, and then we'll have time hopefully to get to a couple more. Is that fair enough? Here's the question. We've kind of alluded to it already, but it's a really good question. What is your advice for mid-career professionals shifting into management roles? What skills are most important to hone in preparation? What skills are recruiters looking for in a manager? So I guess that's the typical synergy, at least I see with the students. They'll get out, they'll become technicians and eventually managers, and then rise to the kind of people you've mentored, Rachelle, who've done great things around the world. But do you have any thoughts on that transition from being a technician or a startup person to a manager?
I would jump in there quickly and say good judgment. You can't teach it, and it's not on your resume. It's not on your LinkedIn necessarily, but everything's great when things are going great, and when the fit hits the shan, right? Who is going to be there to help pull through, right? So when you're looking for managers, you want someone who's going to be able to handle really challenging times and have exceptional judgment. And if you can communicate stories or something that shows that is what you bring, that that level of good judgment, I think that's a game changer.
Thanks so much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I remember making that transition, and the things that hit me in the face were budgets and hiring and people management stuff, and that's stuff that unless you're taking some MBA classes, it doesn't just come with what you trained for in school. A lot of the places, if they say you're going to be managing people, they want to see that you've managed people in the past, and that's not always possible. So diving into the numbers on budgets as much as you can before you're a manager, it will just set you up so much better to help when you're running things like that. I don't know that I have great advice. Just that those are the two things that really are the challenges that really your previous career won't really prepare you for necessarily.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, of all the things of being a manager, I think the budget is probably one of the hardest. It's something I never would have expected. But I would just think back to, when you were, not the manager on your team, what you were looking for in your leader or mentor, and sort of look at those aspects and those, personalities and build off of those, and definitely be more of a mentor, a supporter now, than maybe just as a manager. I think we probably are all dealing with the Great Resignation in all of our different industries and organizations. And so really trying to figure out what your employees are looking for, whether it's working from home, shorter days, more professional development opportunities, really just sort of being there to support the people on your team.
Wonderful.
Yeah, can I just say,
Absolutely.
Justin said mentorship, and that's a great point. BU has a Washington Center in DC, with students who come and do internships in DC, and I've been part of the mentorship program here for quite a few years before I became a manager, and I really think that's a great way to help prepare yourself. And if you don't have actual management experience, that's a good thing to show off when you're applying for jobs, as kind of leadership skills, the same type of skills that they might be looking for in a manager.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And Chip, really, they do a wonderful job, don't they? Professor Montano do a great job. Just a quick pitch. Washington, D.C. program at 776 Mass Ave does a great job and gets a lot of people into nonprofit work in Washington, D.C. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Chip. I'm talking too much. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I started out in that program during my BU experience like 20 years ago. And it is a fantastic program. If there's any current students thinking about doing that in DC, it's a great way to spend a summer.
Absolutely. I think there's something like 3,000 trade associations, which are generally nonprofits in and around the Washington, D.C. area. So there's a wealth of information right there in D.C. Let me go to the next question, if I may, please. You all good with that? Okay, here's the question. It's a very interesting one. We'll see how we do with these. Here's what it is. I'd be happy to have a communications job in higher ed or healthcare where I have some experience. But I found nonprofits to be a very tough sector to break into unless you're already in there. I've sent queries to many colleges and hospitals and never hear back. Apart from a personal connection, how do you break into this business when they never get back to you? I got no comment on that.
I mean, I would never be shy to look up someone on LinkedIn, connect with them personally on a site like that, or just email the hiring manager directly. If you're trying to break into the industry, you really don't have anything to lose as far as, that sort of communication goes. So definitely look up the person on LinkedIn, look up the HR manager of that company or nonprofit on LinkedIn and sort of connect with them, especially if it's taking too long for the traditional processes to get going.
Thank you.
I would just add kind of along those lines is if you're thinking about a particular sector, I'll just call, say higher ed, right? Start building your LinkedIn connections before the job even arises. Because what's interesting is it's a very small world. At the end of the day, someone knows someone who knows someone. And you just start to learn about what they're doing, connect with them, and also make that connection personal. Just make a note, always do a note. I can't tell you how many LinkedIn requests I get, and I don't know who the heck these people are, why they're trying to connect with me. So, just say you're looking to get into higher ed and I'd like to connect with you. If you've got 10 or 15 minutes at some point, I'd love to pick your brain, just that kind of, and then start to build your network. And you'd be amazed at how many people will actually want to help you.
Yep, and I'll emphasize that these are small communities where everybody knows each other. There's dozens of nonprofits in DC alone doing environmental work, and I know somebody at all of them. So if you get a good there's LinkedIn, there's digital networking, but there's hopefully in-person networking coming back as well. You said beyond knowing somebody, but honestly, that's how I got my job. Not that I didn't apply through the traditional means, but it's always good to have someone in your corner, someone who can tell you a little bit about the job and maybe, give you a look where as otherwise your resume might, just sit in the pile.
Thanks so much. You're always worried when you do this that there's not going to be questions. There's a wealth of questions. So let me move on to another one. We'll see how we do over the next 9 or 10 minutes and see if we can answer a couple of these. You guys okay with that? You folks okay with that? Good. Okay. Here's a question.
Yeah.
It's a long one, but it's interesting. I'm a professional paid communicator for nonprofits, and sometimes I offer my services as a volunteer for very small nonprofits, such as a church or a community club that don't have enough to pay for professional services. But often they don't understand the need for professional communication services, that they can benefit from them as much as they would benefit from a professional accountant. Here's the question. Are there good ways to convince them of the benefit of professional communication services?
That's a good one.
I would say I've done some volunteering in a similar vein. And usually what I do is I show them the competition, right? So like we're all on a shoestring, if, even, Alliance Française, right? Like no budget. But if you can show them similar organizations that, just have stepped it up, right? It's not that they look like they're, the BU level communications, which is, the top of the heap there, but, similar organizations, similar budgets, similar types of mission, and the difference, their email compared to ours that doesn't even format properly. And then also showing them the open rates. If you can get into the system and say, look, no one's even opening these things, right? And you can, sometimes I call the other organization like, hey, what's your open rate? And just to give the comparison, to me, that's the only way I've been able to get someone to even consider it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Chip or Justin, any quick thought on that?
I was going to let Rachelle's answer stand for all. That's pretty good.
Okay, great answer. Let's move on. We've got two more questions. If you all are game, we've got two more questions we can get to. If you all are game, we'll do these with relatively short answers if you're okay with that, unless you think they deserve more time. And if so, we'll get to those. And I think we should then satisfy most of the folks in the audience. Fair enough? So this is a good question. The last one's kind of an interesting one. It's very short, but this was a good one too. I work at a large graduate level university in global health. How do I help convince traditional managers and comm folks to move from marketing to storytelling?
I would say a great way to do that is do an A/B test. Do one way, the way you've always done it through a marketing push, but then segment the audience and do another way where you're telling a story of a person in your organization or a patient that you're helping, and see what the results are. That will sway you one way or the other. And I think they'll be surprised that storytelling probably brings in more donors than just the regular marketing push.
Good. You good? Well, another question crept in. Is everybody doing okay?
Doing
Having
great.
the time of your life or what, huh?
Absolutely.
This is great to be with you all. Thank you. We've got two more. So let me just these two and then we'll finish up. Any other questions that come in? We love you guys, but we love you folks, but we just don't have time to answer them. The question is this, very interesting. Corey asked this question. How do you track progress on communications goals and set appropriate timelines on how communications efforts convert to fundraising efforts and or audience expansion? She's asking from the perspective of a small arts organization. I think it's about a $1 million budget.
I've always hired out. Yeah, I mean, for me, and I've been lucky. I've had some budgetary, but I've actually hired small firms to help track the progress with the communications. Even you don't have to bust your budget totally. It doesn't have to be this, all in, very fancy effort, right? Sometimes it's just down and dirty. I've hired freelance people to help us track it, and a lot of times through the email communication. So that's mostly how I've done it. I don't know if you gentlemen have other thoughts.
We do. We have consultants who help us with some of that, but I thought the part of the question about the timelines was a good one. A lot of this fits into the wider strategic plan of the organization and that strategic planning process. We've just gone through a new strategic plan process we've done doing a 3-year strategic plan, and building in those goals to fit with the rest of the organization is key because they're counting on communications to help build the audience for all this other great work that we're doing. So I would say fit it to the rest of the organization's progress as well. as far as like where to set those goals, that's difficult, but it's, you look at your trends and your trajectory of how you've been doing so far, and how you think, the work that's being done is going to impact those in the future. Yeah.
Any brief thought, Justin?
No, I mean, I would agree with Chip. I mean, a lot of that is baked into your strategies that you have planned out for several years and sort of how well you're doing based off of different communications. For us, we're gearing up for a centennial in 4 years, and we have our goals set out for those 4 years heading up to that centennial campaign. And so it's really trying to hit those check marks of the number of donors coming in, which communications pieces brought in those donors, and how can we build those into every year going forward. So it's really, you have to look at the bigger picture of what you're trying to reach, and then see what has worked successfully in the past and sort of bake that into your strategy as you go forward.
I think we're in good shape. I'll ask the last question I'm going to ask you is a thought to share that's on your mind. So that'll be the last question we ask. Here's one more quick one. If we can do this quickly, it's a broad question, kind of interesting question. The question is, what form of communication is most successful in bringing in the most funds? Twitter, newsletters, print, blogs, etc. Good luck, folks. What do you think?
I'm a big believer in video. I think we talk about storytelling. I think images and stories through video really grabs people, and you can create a narrative. It can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. It can be quick little hits on social media. The different ways that I use video, I think grabs the most attention and translates into the most robust fundraising. So I would say video. Thanks,
Chip. Thank you very much. Justin.
I was going to say, emails which have a video in it or a short story are our number one, communication for bringing in funds. Beyond that, it's really volunteer outreach, texting and phone calls from volunteers who are either parents or alumni, reaching out to people that they're familiar with.
Good, thank you.
And I'll just add that we have a younger audience that has been interested at BCRF. And what's interesting is Instagram has been exceedingly popular and successful. It's a medium that they're very familiar with. So, I think about, again, knowing your audience, right? I have some older donors that aren't on Instagram. They like the letters. The videos, I think it's the best bang for your buck because you can tweak them, you can edit them for your different audiences. But yeah, just kind of thinking about who you're trying to message.
Thank you. I think our time is just about up. We're going to ask you all if you would answer one more question to send us off. And the question will be, what do you want to talk about that we haven't talked about? What's on your mind? What's something that you want to share that's on your mind? So we'll take care of that. But a couple of housekeeping things first. First, a very sincere thank you to Tracy Toe. Tracy did a wonderful job putting this together. I think you all agree. I never worked with somebody who's better than she at doing this work. So thank you. And a special thank you again to Bert Glass, my colleague, wonderful colleague, nonprofit background. Let me just offer a final comment here, and then we'll end with you all, and then we'll finish up. Quick thought from everybody, and we'll finish up, and I'll be done. Fair enough? Let me just offer this final thought here, and that is this. We just had a wonderful discussion, and just want to thank the fantastic speakers and all of the audience members for joining us today. As a reminder, folks, if you weren't able to view this webinar in its entirety, it will soon be available on the Boston University Alumni Association website. One more time, it will soon be available on the Boston University Alumni Association website and the College of Communication YouTube channel. We're just so glad you joined us, and thank you for this wonderful afternoon. So I think what we'd like to do is, if you all are, I'm just going left to right, if it's okay, Chip, we'll start with you if you're okay. Final thought, and then we'll go with Justin, and then we'll go with Rachelle. One more time, congratulations, Chip, on your new child, and Rachelle, congratulations on your marriage. And Justin, thank you for everything for so many people. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm just so glad you're here. It's just a pleasure to work with you all. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go to Chip first.
Thank you.
I'll say one thing I've been thinking about more and more is the idea of being a good partner. That's something that in our, we've talked about how competitive these spaces are, but in, at least in my industry, we all have a lot of the same goals. I live So looking for ways to kind of build off of each other. I know you're supposed to be selling yourself and your organization at all times, but when there's a good partnership, I like to overcredit for others and other groups, and I find that in the future it's paid back. So that's what I would say. Partnerships are key when we're going for a good cause. You want your organization to be a big part of it, but in the end, the ultimate goal is good for everybody. So that's what I would say.
Thanks so much, Chip.
I would say my sort of one takeaway piece is just to be as transparent as possible as what your organization is doing. You will not be everything to all people, and especially for independent schools, there's a lot of news critiquing independent schools and how they're responding to social issues. And so being as transparent as you can about what your mission is and what your purpose is, and where you stand on those social issues, I think you will bring in sort of the right people, the right audiences, the right students and families, and just being upfront and honest about who you are.
Okay, me. All right. First, I just want to thank Chip and Justin. You guys are great, and Eddie. It's always fun to be with you. I would say this is about you, right? Take care of yourself. No one is going to take care of you but you. And so I think that gets lost in all careers, that nonprofit work, it's not always a huge payday. It's a lot of hours. I would encourage people to think about setting precedents early for themselves. You're not answering emails at midnight. You're getting to the gym or whatever you like to do. Take care of yourself, get your sleep, try to eat right. It's very easy to lose track of that, and it will pay off. You will, a well-rested you is going to be more successful than, a really tired and burned out you. So I just encourage everyone to remember to care for themselves.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for all you do for so many, and for the purpose that you shared about your important work. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go Terriers.
Yeah.